You're saying, I'm sitting here in a class, talking to my kids all the time. I'm never going to use this, Dad. Ask the teacher genuinely, without being mean, after class, hey, can you tell me, I'm struggling a little. I'm not seeing how I would use this in the real world. I want to. I believe you're teaching me this for good reason. Is it primarily developing my thinking skills, or is there something I'm missing? Because, for example, algebra. So many people are like, I'll never use algebra. Well, if you ever become an entrepreneur or business owner, you're going to use a lot of algebra to try to figure out, break-even points and different things. So I just, that sense of being open to where you are and just enjoying where you're at without getting too caught up in it.
All right, I'm here now with Mr. Wade Galt. He's a software developer and the podcast host of the 3-Day Weekend Club. Mr. Galt, how is your day going so far?
Doing great so far, man. I love already just tell people your preparation for this. You're a true professional. I'm stoked to do this. This is awesome. Thank you for having me.
Hear that. It's always really nice talking to people like you who have such a passion and a lot of knowledge about a specific thing for you. That's about how you can make your business life not so overworking and more relaxing and actually finding the happiness, which is the goal of business anyways. But before we get into that, let's talk about your childhood. So think back, I don't know how many years, but think back to when you were a kid. What kind of kid were you?
Sure. So I'm very blessed that my parents really allowed us to be us. So my parents are from the islands. They're from Trinidad and Tobago. I was born in Canada, but grew up in South Florida. And very much, in some ways, I guess perhaps stubborn in the sense of thinking I know something, but very creative, like to play. Give me I don't know, there was a hero, Blue Falcon, and he had little armbands. So give me some poster board and some armbands and cut them up and draw on the buttons so I can do that, all that sort of stuff. So very much like playing outside, love sports. For me, sports was something I'd work hard at a lot. My father was awesome at helping me with that because I wasn't very coordinated physically. He was an athlete, of course, as life would have it. So he represented his country and everything. So he had to put in the hours with me to help me do basic things like skipping, like the like 2 feet. Like I couldn't do that. So, but I got that kind of support and just grew up in a really nice, supportive environment, and really also got to enjoy different cultures. And I think that was a theme that has kind of gone out throughout my life, that my parents being from Trinidad and Tobago and having a lot of my family from there, but growing up in Southeast Florida. So I also already got to experience the difference between an island culture and an American culture, got to see what's beautiful about both, what both can contribute to an awesome life. And definitely so much of what I bring with me today about believing, and in my case, at least a personal knowing for me, that life is more fun when there's time to enjoy it. That definitely comes from the islands, of just not taking things so seriously and making sure that, yes, work is important, but people are important, experience is important, and enjoying life is very important. So I got to do a lot of that, playing outside, making stuff up. Got to do a lot of that, which I'm very grateful for.
Let's talk about that because I remember I was very much that very like hands-on. I remember getting a box from like Amazon, and I would cut a hole in it and have like my iPad and put it in front of it, and it was like a vending machine. Like you could I had like a what was it? Oh, I had a long rope, and then there was a piece of duct tape attached to it, and so you could just kind of move it and pick stuff up from the floor. So that reminds me a lot of me. And on that note, why do you think you were that way? Was it just genetic? Did you see your siblings or your friends do the similar things? Why?
Sure. So I think part of it is biology. My wife and I have two children, and one of them is gifted, and one of them is not categorized as gifted. And a lot of people think gifted means you're smarter than. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It's very often a way of perceiving the world. It's um, for example, gifted children in general have a very strong sense. And I might be saying this wrong, but one of the themes I know my daughter has that I had, very intense about things and how the world should be, and we want to fix things, we want to save the world, and everything needs to be a certain way, and everybody should be nice to each other, and everybody should be fair with each other. And so, in a lot of ways, I think part of it, of who I was, of just creating and doing things, was having that sense of, and also gifted children often just see the world differently, not better, but differently. And it can actually almost be a hindrance at times, especially as an entrepreneur, to be able to see all the possibilities, or we could do this, we could do that, but what are we going to do? So, on one sense, I think there's biology, but also because of the way we were raised, and to enjoy life, to play, to respect people, and just to have fun, and to, yes, please go be creative. Anything that you create is going to be, at least on some level, awesome, simply because you created it. Anything that if you sing a song, if you come up with something, you do a little skit, whatever it might be, that kids, often do, and adults still, for attention, that at least you're going to get that, yes, hey, that's good that you did something. So, in that sense, I would say, and definitely looking back, I just recently turned 50. So, looking back from even when I was 5, that theme of, yes, if I say something, it's going to be welcomed, and I have something to say, and what I say is valuable. It might not always be accurate, but it's valuable, and I'm worth being heard at the table, not monopolizing, but heard. And so, with those lessons, looking now, wow, you have me, this is like, you get on a couch and I'll lay back here and do a session here. um, just seeing how much that supported me believing that, yes, what I have to say is worth something. And now, as I look at, and again, in my mind, seeing some of the friends of my children, because now I have a parent's perspective of this, and seeing some of the kids that I think are so brilliant and so talented, but don't say a lot, and they're in their shell. And so part of me wonders, gosh, wonder what maybe they missed. And maybe it's biology. I don't know. I'm not that smart. But in my case, had a lot of that support and that encouragement, so that, um, being part of the community, adults, and also, this is, I think, part of the Trinity community, part of a lot of communities, that we were allowed to speak to the adults, not rudely, but clearly. Yes, I'd like that. No, thank you, I would not like that. I can order my meal. I can tell you I want that. I like that. I don't like that. We definitely were not in the children are meant to be seen, not heard. We were told, yes, you're a human being. So I think that's huge, at least for me and my confidence in creating things and starting software companies and being an author, having a podcast, different things like that. So yeah, really, really big stuff.
If you could put like a number on any kid, who you would be considered gifted in that mindset, if you could put a number on what percentage of it is purely biological and what percentage of it is cultivated by parenting or environment or culture, how would you kind of set that up?
I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of take this with humility. If I were younger, I'd say I'm copping out. I'm gonna have to go 50-50, because I've also seen people that do try something creative, and when they do it, they get that little failure and they shut right down. So I'm not sure where it would lead. It's kind of that concept, if, and you and I are walking next to each other, and I walk 1 degree at a different angle than you. And, for the first, I don't know, 20, 30 feet, it might not matter. It might take a mile or 10 miles until we realize, wow, Wade went in a completely different direction. So I think maybe the gifted child perhaps is a little more stubborn, or maybe they just see things their own way, or maybe it just keeps coming up for them, where the other person's like, oh, I just didn't do okay, so that's not good. But I definitely think it's a mix of both, because I watched some of my friends growing up that were definitely very creative, and had maybe some family stuff going on, which I didn't realize at the time, and later on realized, well, why did this kid, who's so smart and so creative and so intelligent, why did he start failing tests? And well, he wanted to fit in with a certain crowd, because he wasn't getting his social needs met in the crowd of us that he was in. And so he wouldn't be accepted if he was getting grades that were too high, or it made him stand out in a way he didn't want to. And just some of the other variables. So, wow. And God, my kids always make fun of me when I say, you always say you've got a degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in psychology, and I still don't know. So I don't know. It's really humbling to or maybe I should have paid attention more during my degree. I'm not sure.
Let's talk about that real quick. So you talked about how these gifted kids have sometimes negative traits, like, or I'm not going to say negative, but like stubbornness, maybe they're a little annoying or overly persistent, which could have come across, in the wrong way. In the grand scheme of things, do you think it is do you think there really is a negative characteristic to kids, or like if they're a daredevil, if they, sometimes do things without thinking, if they're a little bit overly persistent, or like, do you think there's such thing as a negative characteristic, or is it just part of them which can be cultivated in a good way?
It can definitely be cultivated. A lot of it is, you know, I'm again seeing this with my daughter at times and with my son in different ways. He's socially brilliant. They're both very intelligent, but certain things stand out. He will see things in people socially that other people that adults can't read. My daughter will see things intellectually. When I was in school, I was not I was polite about it because I've been taught how to be polite about it. I wasn't trying to correct the math teacher, but I was very gifted in math. So I'd say, well, hey, I see this connection. What do you see? Because I was fortunate to be around a lot of teachers who were trained to work with gifted kids and just were kind, open-hearted people, and maybe they were just secure people that they could handle a 12-year-old giving them an idea. It was able to be recognized, but at times it can be, no, it's that. And if you're not careful, and sometimes the adult can't handle it. Well, no, we're gonna do it this way. Well, that's stupid. Well, once you go, I mean, how do you handle that when somebody tells you that you can't be heard? And I think that's the part of, for me, I mean, jokes aside, I was not very socially skilled. And so that's the part that I believe, and again, I could be wrong. I believe that we all have skills. I believe we all have weaknesses. The concept of an idiot savant is the idea of, and I'd be nicer if it was savant idiot, and an idiot's kind of a strong word, but the idea of this person that can do these like incredible things, but then I don't know, like they can't tie their shoes, let's say. And so I think all of us are savants in some ways, and all of us ain't too bright in some ways. And I think so much of life is understanding that, celebrating that, being okay with that. And I think so much of assimilating, and not assimilating in a way where you lose yourself, but being able to integrate with other people, to be interdependent and connect with people, whether you're a Bill Gates, a Steve Jobs, an Oprah Winfrey, an Ariana Huffington, an Elon Musk, or a person at the grocery store, or any other normal people like the rest of us that aren't as, let's say, famous, is how can you navigate the fact that there's this gap, that maybe I know something you don't, and can I also be socially wise enough to not just spend the whole time talking about what I know that you don't know, which is going to make you feel not so smart and not want to be around me, especially if I am really intelligent at something, or if I am like really brilliant at something. And how do I incorporate you, which is a social form of intelligence? That's the part. And for me, I think that's the definitely more important lesson. And if you look at, not that intellectual intelligence is not important, but if you look at things, the biggest challenges in our world, we have the intellectual intelligence to solve poverty, to solve hunger, to solve the water crisis. It's all there. Do we have the emotional intelligence and the social intelligence? Apparently not yet. So, um, and from that standpoint, that's when you say, whether you talk about rebellion, whether it be somebody who is gifted or not, or just the idea, it's a basic concept. When, sometimes my kids will say, well, how come there's kids, starving in the world? Well, we gave a lot of money to that country. Well, sometimes the leaders of that country don't share that. And how do you persuade that person without force to say, hey, be kind of nice if you share that? These are your country people. And those sort of things that I think in some level, if somebody can channel that gifted energy or any passion, intensity, drive, hustle, grind, whatever, if you can channel it away and temper it with some humility, that's helpful. And I guess that's why a lot of times I think some of our best leaders, and this doesn't always come with age, it comes with wisdom. And wisdom does not always come with age. Some people are very old and not so wise, and some people are young and very wise. But when you can then see that person who is a little rough around the edges, they're kind of blunt, like, well, that's stupid. Can you show that person, hey, you know what? When you say it that way, people aren't able to hear you. And this whole dream you have of building a company and putting, a rocket on Venus or whatever it might be, you might be brilliant enough to figure it out. But if you can't get people to work with you and they don't like you, your rocket's going nowhere. And so balancing that, I think, is huge. And I think my parents did a great job, and the mentors I had of helping me understand that.
So after you went to high school, you went to college or university, and you studied business. You studied marketing. You also studied mental health and psychology. Why? Obviously these are both three very different paths. Why did you choose to study all three of these things?
Okay, so basics, and it goes back to parents. Dad is a successful entrepreneur athlete. Mom is a successful, um, well, when she was younger, dancer in the chorus. She's into spirituality and psychology and philosophy and reading. So I had all these influences. So kind of not reconciling, but integrating. How do I integrate these? So even when I was in high school, or shoot, middle school, selling candy, buying them from the wholesale store before Costco, there's other wholesale stores and selling candy and those sort of things. That was the entrepreneurial side. But then, well, Wade, what are you going to do with some of that money? Oh, yeah, of course I'm going to give some of that money to charity because that's so having those together. When I first went into school, I thought I wanted to be a teacher, and I still am a teacher. That's my teaching, coaching, that's my passion. My father, practical man, says, well, Wade, look, if you want to be a teacher, great. If you want to be in a situation where you have the financial capacity to provide for your family the way I have, you probably want to be a business owner. So if you specifically want to be a doctor or something very specific, hey, go do that. But if you're just going to be in business in general and you're not sure, or you're not sure you want to be a teacher because you see the upside, summers off and teaching people and inspiring people in movies like Dead Poet Society, but then you see the other grind, which is just dealing with kids that don't want to learn sometimes, you say, I'm not so sure. So for me, it's been this, even to this day, balancing those two. What should be a hobby? What should be a profession? How do I bounce back between the two of them? And when I was growing up and going through high school, so I graduated high school in 1989. So back then, it wasn't as easy to say, well, I'm going to have a side hustle that is completely unrelated to what I do. And I'm going to do that 5 hours or 10 hours because I've got all this technology and I can connect with somebody in another part of the world. It was okay, there's the library, there's encyclopedias. They're at least a year and a half old. There's, well, no, you can't be talking to people. You can't be on the phone talking to adults. Like there were so many more barriers. So it was very, and in some ways it was a simpler world. So it's not better, worse, it's different. But trying to, so it became more of, okay, I'm going to go get a business degree first, and then I'm going to get a psych degree. And then there's business psychology, but that's kind of, and so for me, it's always been this integration of wanting to help people create a fulfilled life, see people be happy, see people enjoy. And one of the things that impacted me most growing up is when my father and his business really took off. I was about 10 years old. He started making a lot more money than he thought he was going to. Um, and they were good with it. They always lived well within their means. And his friends started doing the same. And so his friends who were his age, I was friends with their children. And I started seeing how that played out for the kids. And you've probably heard this said before that money is simply an amplifier. If you're happy, well, you're going to have some cooler, happier experiences. And if you're not happy, it's not going to fix it. So I saw that. And I got to see that while it was awesome to have money and still believe it's awesome to have money properly earned and you're serving people and helping, that money was not the variable, it was not the main variable. So just kind of this whole thing of keeping an eye on, okay, well, how do I integrate this? How do I focus on serving the world? How may I serve the world? How can I do this? And then also having the influence of a parent, a mother that would make sure I understood that yes, 20 something thousand people are going to die today of hunger and preventable diseases. And what does it mean that I, as somebody who's not one of those people, has the opportunity to make an impact in their life? And then getting tougher, okay, well, then, gosh, how much abundance, quote unquote, should I have? How much is okay to have? How much do I help people? How much do I then push away money because I'm not supposed to have it? Is there a God? And if there's a God, which I believe there is, I'm not selling it, but I believe there is, then what's my calling to give back? And so that's where it gets fun and tricky and interesting in life. And I've been working with that since I was around your age and still working on that. But it's fun. I used to bother me. It used to be an equation I had to figure out. And once I realized that nobody's really figured it out, it's a dance. It's an ebb and flow that I've become more comfortable with it.
I always find it really interesting whenever I interview adult entrepreneurs on the show because now a side hustle, being an entrepreneur, is normal. Like it's even cool to be. And so like it's it's pretty normal for a 15-year-old to create a podcast, a charity, a company. But back then that was almost unheard of, that a 15-year-old has a radio show. You have to have money to get the station. You have to have huge sponsors behind you to fund it. And it is almost unheard of back then to just have a side hustle, or kind of leave everything to go do a business. Let's talk about your dilemma with teaching and then getting a business degree. And it's a problem a lot of people have today, in that the digital world, social media makes you able to take anything and essentially turn it into a something. And that's very broad, but you can take any hobby and turn it into something, whether that's a business, whether that's a blog, whether that's a podcast, anything, something like that. How do you know if a hobby or passion project can be a business, or if it should be a business?
Awesome question. So, a couple things. Just want to comment on what you said about being 15. Yeah, in our days, the side hustle, and by the way, I think it's awesome what you're doing. So, I would not minimize what you're doing, and I don't think you're doing. You're simply saying it's a lot easier to do. In our case, the parallel would be, at 10 years old, I had a lawn business. And most of us had either a lawn business or we sold candy. Most of us, we had a lawn business, we sold candy in school, those sort of things. So that was but it would have taken a lot more drive, more than drive. We would have had to be so imbalanced in our personal life to have a podcast or a radio show that it became statistically abnormal. Whereas today, it's like, okay, that's more possible. For me, a lot of the question, I'll use an analogy that my mother once taught me when it comes to buying real estate. Now, my mother's not a real estate expert, but she's unbelievably wise. And she's watched my father and other entrepreneurs who are experts in area A dabble in real estate, in investments, and get their butts handed to them. And that means, losing badly. And what she always told me with buying a house, she said, look, and this is years ago when houses just always appreciated, not what they've been doing in the last 10 to 15 years. But she said, look, it's never a risk really for you to buy the house you're going to live in. And even if you buy a little bigger house than you wanted, you buy that dream house, yes, because you're building something and you're putting money into it. Great. But once you start buying houses just for money, you better know what you're doing, because to flip them or start leveraging a lot of money, because if you leverage, you can lose. And I would say from that standpoint, life can be very simple. If you enjoy what you're doing today, if you have a good day today, and tomorrow you have a good day, and a good day, you're happy, you enjoy most of what's going on, most things, or enough things went your way, like, yeah, I like this. That's a happy life. A lot of people have raised this expectation that because I can reach the world means I should, that I'm supposed to, that I have something to say. Maybe I do, maybe I don't, or that it's even necessary to be happy because, you know, a few things. I still get to teach, in that I'm a coach, I have a software business, so I get moments of teaching. I don't have the situation where I'm a teacher in a public education system or private education system. My inner gifted child would lose their mind in that, in some ways, at least at this stage of my life. And I want to provide a certain level of abundance. So I'm making very practical choices. And once you throw in lifestyle, well, how badly do I want it? And there are some people that are so brilliant that they can figure out how to make a 6 or a 7-figure income and work not a lot of hours and make a big impact and be charismatic. And that's a very small percentage of people, but it's harder to recognize them. The equivalent is if you see someone, let's say Shaquille O'Neal size in basketball, and I know the man has worked hard. I'm a fan of his. I've watched his career, but there's still something about being 7 foot, 300 pounds that helps. And people recognize that. They can't see that with you, with me, with whomever. So people assume everybody can do it. And then you add to it, well, it depends what your life situation is. My wife and I have, a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old children. And so for the last 15 years for me, I would more accurately describe my journey as a solopreneur lifestyle entrepreneur who's more focused about, do I have time to hang out with my family? And can I keep playing this really cool game called entrepreneurialism, as opposed to, I want to scale and grow a business to seven figures or eight figures and financially take over the world. Um, so a lot of it's about just what makes you happy. And this is where I do think biology comes in. If you even take away insecurity, some people are driven, and I hope for people, and this is not meant to sound sour grapes. There are some people that amass really high numbers of wealth and followers because they're driven, not driving. They're not behind the wheel. Something's driving them, an insecurity, a need to prove, or whatever it might be. They don't feel they're smart enough, this and that. Most of the people I know that experience that don't like that experience. And so they would tell you they would wish something better, let's say, for their children. So not everybody who's making truckloads of money is that. There are some that manage to balance it. And then there's some they can balance it and they're still enjoying the process. But I've also noticed that raising kids, for example, takes a lot of time. So you'll notice there is a trend, at least I notice, of people that are, let's say, in their early 30s that really get a lot of media attention, are doing well and are scaling their business very quickly. Very often, they don't have children at that stage of their life. They're still either single or they're married without kids, and they're maybe waiting if they're wise. And the happier ones, even if they have children, are really good at delegation. So, overall, going full circle back is, if you enjoy something, it's a hobby. Great. If and always have hobbies, whether you make money in them or not. Then the question becomes, does it, what I'm going to say, does it flow for you to make money in that? Are you also talented and gifted in that? I have a hobby. I like singing with 80s music while I play my drums. My wife says I sound like a dead cat. So apparently it's not a talent, it's a hobby. Nobody's paid me yet. And at the same time, as somebody, for example, who used to play a lot of, I still do play a lot of beach volleyball, but I played at a semi pro level and watched some of my friends go pro. I didn't want to turn that hobby into a job because practicing wasn't that fun for me. I liked playing literally 8, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, and I would still discover within, and I'd practice here and there, but I didn't want it to become something. So sometimes there's that sense of, well, no, I want this to stay a hobby, that I never get attached to the results too much. I mean, even as an athlete, you kind of get attached to winning, but I wanted to be able to enjoy it. So some people might say, well, I don't want to, so I've written books on spirituality. I don't want to get caught up in how many people read those, or if my beliefs are right or not, because that's a whole other slippery slope. So I've chosen to give those away. That's a hobby. Um, I think if we're really insightful, we can find a way to get closer and closer to doing what we enjoy and finding a way to monetize that, to make money off of that, and then find other people who are brilliant at supporting us. And my journey's been that. But in my case, it was a much tougher, like, yes, no decision. You're either a teacher or you're an entrepreneur. There didn't seem, at least as far as I was able to see, a middle ground. So I would literally bounce back and forth. There was 7 years in the corporate world. Then I was getting my master's degree in psychology. Then I started my own business. And the software business I have allows me a lot of time to do different things. So it's still been this back and forth. But if a person, I'd say, if you have something that's a joy and a passion, and just going back to that idea that you lose sense of time doing it, you love doing it, you would do it even if nobody paid you, have at least one of those things in your life. Please, for yourself, for the world. That's something tied to your gift, your passion, and your passion might or might not be what pays the bills. It's some do, some don't. I know happy and miserable people that do it each way. So I've not found a formula, and I've not found any of the top wisest authors or thought leaders that I've listened to have ever said that it has to be one way or another. Most have said you want to make sure you're doing whatever your passion is, and you want to make sure you pay your bills. Those two things, but they might or might not overlap.
There's a lot to unpack there. But the first thing I really want to get into is on the topic of happiness, right? So obviously, a huge part of life is being happy, and that oftentimes derives from what you do every day. From 9 to 5 is obviously a big part of what can make you not happy. And there is kind of a culture of overworking, which we'll get into in a second. But some people are very fine with working long, long, long hours because, like Elon Musk, Gary Vee types who just, that's them. While other people love it as well, but also love other things in life like family. They love their hanging out with friends. They love doing other hobbies as well. How do you know which type of person you are?
That's such a great question. And going, I love specifically that Gary Vee in the last few years, I've followed his content for quite a while, that he's made it more clear to say, yeah, no, I have family time. I just do it my way. And your way might be differently. And I've heard him sometimes say, look, the 60-hour hustle or 70-hour hustle is not for everybody. Find your answer. If you want to be hanging out, if you want to watch sports on the weekend, great. Find your thing. And I think that's a lot of what it is it really comes down to this basic idea that we're taught as kids that you're unique, be yourself. And even as we become older, we're taught, well, see, if I do this, I'll get approval and Facebook likes or Instagram likes, or especially as kids, I'll get people saying that they want to be my friend because I'm doing things a certain way. But that might not be the way you're wired. And again, I don't pretend to understand complete biology, but I will say this as a parent who's watched us have two children, they've grown up in almost the same household and they're very different. And I've even had friends that have had twins that said, yes, it was literally the same household and they're very different. So there seems to be some predisposition, wiring, genetics, life calling, whatever you want to call it, that we have different ways to see things. So the same way it would be odd for me to say, well, I need you to like this sort of ice cream to be my friend. You'd say, well, what does that have to do with anything? I don't like ice cream, or I like, or whatever it is. That if you do that and if you compromise that, well, you kind of lose who you are. So we've seen these paths of how you can do it. And the ones that are, I think, best at what they do, and the ones that are able to financially give content that they don't have to make money off of. Another reason why I love, and there's other people who do this, but Gary Vee does this, Jay Shetty does this, that look, here's content that I'm literally not selling anything. Here's the content. Of course, I make money. I'm a business person, but here's this content. Run with it. Be happy with it in the sense that, look, do your thing. And if you're looking at what it is that makes you happy, think about, do you feel like you're missing out on things? So for me, and definitely if you're at a stage in life where you're a parent that has children uh, beneath, let's say 15 or even 17 in the house, they'll make you aware if you're even remotely paying attention when they miss you not being present with them. So sometimes you have that. If you don't have that, then you might say, like I have some of my friends that don't have kids yet, and they're like, well, Wade, what am I missing out on? And my simple invitation to them is to say, well, first of all, do you feel like you're missing out on anything? But, and this is where some of my spiritual beliefs come in. I do believe there's a God. I do believe that there's people are awesome and there's good things going on in the universe. And for the most place, the universe is an abundant, wonderful place. And people do good things. It doesn't always make the news, but we're for the most part, I think, uh, really great. And so my sort of invitation to one of my friends was, I said, look, I just think there's so much else cool stuff going on the planet that to me, after 4 days of work, I'm good. I want to see what else is going on, even if it's just being present with people and learning from people or connecting with people or traveling or whatever it might be. So for me, I feel the opportunity cost. I feel I'm missing out on life. And there's a specific exercise that I've asked people to do when I work with them about what are your 20 most positive and impactful life experiences. And usually somewhere between 80% to 90% of those, they'll say happened outside of work. And again, it's not an indictment against work. It's not that work is bad. I think work is awesome. And the more you can do what you're good at and called to do, that's great. But if it's the case that so much of life happens outside of work, and maybe because there are less restrictions, it's less attached to outcome. Again, I don't know all the reasons, but then I want more of that. And so if I can get 3 days off each weekend rather than two, for me, I've increased, I don't know, what do you call my happiness life expectancy or the time of period that I can enjoy enjoyable moments. So I've just added to my life and I've added to it while I'm young, not waiting to say that when I earn a certain amount of money that I can enjoy it, that I can enjoy it at this moment. And so in that, the whole hobby, I'd say definitely move towards things that people say, yeah, you're really great at that and delegate the things if you can, that not so much so. But I think there's also something to be said about learning from things. So when I was working for a company, really good company, and I was in their insurance claims department, and the department I was in was for people who got injured. And I came home to my mom one day and said, this is so shallow. Everybody, all they're doing is talking to me about money, 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 money. I'm going to go to India to help people because, of course, I guess you got to go to India to help people. You can't help people in your neighborhood. I don't know. So she says to me, and she knew exactly what I was talking about because I was working in, insurance claims. People want to make sure they're getting money. They want to make sure they're getting paid. She said, "Wade, tell me about the job." Well, people, they're in an accident. They're hurt. How are they feeling, Wade? Well, they're a little uncertain. They're literally physically shaken up. They're not certain if they're going to get taken advantage of. And what do you do? Well, I calm them down. I help them feel better, less upset, this, that, help them make sure they're taken care of. She's great. And you make money doing this, right? Yeah, great. Get your butt back in there. Go do your job. And then when you want to, go fly to India and help people. But in the meanwhile, there's people right in front of you that are looking to be helped. You don't need to go somewhere. And in that sense, I would invite people that if you're not in the job you want to be in, or even if, or you're in the class you want to be in, if you're saying, I'm sitting here in a class, talking to my kids all the time, I'm never going to use this, Dad. Ask the teacher genuinely without being mean after class. Hey, can you tell me? I'm struggling a little. I'm not seeing how I would use this in the real world. I want to. I believe you're teaching me this for good reason. Is it primarily developing my thinking skills, or is there something I'm missing? Because, for example, algebra. So many people are like, I'll never use algebra. Well, if you ever become an entrepreneur or business owner, you're going to use a lot of algebra to try to figure out, break even points and different things. So I just that sense of being open to where you are and just enjoying where you're at without getting too caught up in it.
On that note, so you're the host of a podcast called the 3 Day Weekend Club. So we'll talk about that. Um, when you're starting out a business and you're not, so the majority of people are not Elon Musk, Gary V, right? So the majority of entrepreneurs who aren't the Elon Musks of the world, um, and they want to have that separation. They want to do things. They want to go hang out with their friends. They want to go travel the world. At the same time, they're also trying to run a company, and a small company by themselves. And then we'll take it on the flip side for the kids that are also running a company and they actually don't have time because they have to go to school. They have tennis practice, whatever. So, how can both these people on both sides of the spectrum kind of find ways to run and grow a business without putting in 100% of their time just on work, work, work?
Sure, great question. So there's a book called um, Getting Real. It's by the founders of Basecamp. And one of the things they talk about that, and it relates to software, but I think it relates to any project. And they say it's better to do a smaller software, let's say that's half the size, and do it 100% right, than to do double the size and do all the features 50% right, because then it's just incomplete. It's so one thing at a time, one small win at a time. You know this from podcasting. Podcasting is a long game. For anybody that didn't start 10 years ago, it's a longer game than it was for the people who started 10 years ago because there were more, there was less competition, there was less people there, and although there were less probably people listening. So I think in all of this, it comes down to priorities. What's most important to you? We don't get to do everything we want to do, but we can sometimes almost do anything we want to do. And so if you say, well, my priorities are my tennis game, my friendships, and let's assume school, I have to do my school. It's like the work, I have to pay my bills. But outside of that, let's say it's my tennis, my friendships, and I want to start this side business. Okay, well, what could that look like? Well, the tennis I do to certain times, or maybe that's a hobby, or maybe I do certain hours on the weekend. Definitely want to make sure you get a certain level of sleep. Otherwise, your performance will just tank, which a lot of people, unfortunately, and definitely for sure, this sounds like a public service announcement. This is a public service announcement. If you're having to use coffee or energy drinks and you're below 30, and this is not a medical opinion, this is just, you're probably not getting enough sleep because sleep does what all those things do for you much more naturally and much more healthily. So a lot of it might be managing your schedule. And yes, sometimes you're gonna need to choose and to say, okay, well, this is more important, or I'm going to do these things on the weekend. One of the best lessons I learned from an entrepreneur named Trey Smith was just the idea. He said he'd write his list of all the things he wants to do, but he'd say one at a time. Because if I try to do all of them at once, and I struggle with that, then I'm literally giving, let's say 10 projects, 10%. Well, gosh, not only will it take forever, but it's never really good quality versus I'm gonna do this one thing or maybe two, because maybe while one's percolating, another one's growing, or maybe two or three, like, a podcast is a longer term play. It's not something, if you want somebody to buy your course tomorrow, you might run an ad. You want to grow a following and have impact, you might do something longer term. But in essence, to really choose again, what do you love? And it sounds cheesy. What you love will not necessarily make you money, but it will give you the energy to do what you want to do and to at least stay committed to it. So there's this concept people will say, if you had $100 million in the bank, and for most people that's a good enough number that they'd be like, okay, I don't have to work again. If you had $100 million in the bank, what would you do with your time? And what is sometimes I'll hear people say is, that's your dream, that's your dream job, your dream life. I'm like, no, 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 that's your dream lifestyle. Because if I had $100 million in the bank, I'll admit I might not work as much. I might be a little lazy. That might be my dream lifestyle. What your calling is, in my opinion, is what you'll do even if you don't get paid. Will you wake up in the night to feed the baby? Will you look out for your friends even if you don't get paid for it? Will you do the right thing? Those sort of things. So I'd say look for those things that you're going to do regardless of whether you get paid for them or not. And then once you find those things, then do look and say, okay, how does one get paid? So if you're a musician, you might say, yes, you get paid being the lead, the front man of a lead singer or a front woman singer of a band that sells 1 million records. Okay, great. That's not quite so easy. Let's start with the basics. How about being an audio engineer? How about, helping produce concerts? So I think there's levels, and saying go into that world and then grow in there. And then of course you'll meet the people, you'll connect with people that then have the connections, as opposed to saying, I want to be a musician, but I'm spending all my time as an accountant over here and thinking that someday I'm going to connect with the music world. No, no, get in the music world. Even if you're going to be an accountant for musicians, great. Kind of make that connection happen so it's not so hard. So you're not living so many different lives. I mean, even Batman only has two lives, so to be able to, and he's human, the rest of them don't know. But from that perspective, to say, again, still get in your 8 hours, wake up refreshed. If you're tired, it might not be your work. It might not even be your job. Sometimes volume. So I've worked at a job where that same job I was referencing about being in claims, at one point I was very overworked and was doing about 60 hours a week of it, hated the job. In another department, in another office, similar job, almost exact responsibilities, I got to, I was able to do the job in 32, 35 hours a week, had time to have lunch with friends, got to go, loved the job because I got to do the work, feel like I was contributing, have time for social with friends. And so again, a lot of it is just look to literally your inner feedback. Does your body feel energized? Do you feel happy? Do you feel okay with what you're doing? And again, if you're putting in caffeine, energy drinks, that sort of stuff, drugs, you can't hear your body. So it becomes hard to do that.
A lot of sense prioritizing what your life you wanted to look like with the $100 million analogy. And if you aren't getting paid, would you still do it? It is really, really important and an easy test to figure out those priorities and setting them straight. My last question to you, Mr. Galt, is if you could go back to when you were a kid growing up in the islands and you only had a few words to of advice or lessons that you could say to yourself all those years back, what would those be?
Keep being you, because it's worked for me. When I've done that, it's worked. And it's worked. It doesn't mean it's worked that it's made me money. It doesn't mean it's worked that it's gotten me a girlfriend or a friend or an A, but it's worked. It's the shortest it's been, unless you're looking to do something that hurts other people, which again usually is not what you come up with when you say who's me. um, Me being me is the shortest path to me getting where I want to get. Me listening to other people too much sort of take me off the path, and I have to come back on the path, and then, okay, let's get focused down again. So being me, not in a rebellious way, because if you're even the rebel can't be them, because a rebel has to rebel against something. So if people agree with them, the rebel doesn't know what to do. But truly being me, just keep being me, keep wearing the shirt that's multicolored, keep whatever it might be, doing that thing. That's worked really well for me.
This was amazing. Thank you so much, Mr. Galt, for coming on today's episode.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this. This is wow, this is such a cool experience. You are a phenomenal interviewer. Thank you so much for having me.